At the edge of an ancient world where the sun never truly sets nor fully rises, stretches a vast sea of sand, the desert realm of Simonarek. Here, the winds are more than mere breeze. They whisper in the tongue of millennia, carrying the memories of gods and the dreams of humankind. Long ago, this land was home to gods of wind, sand, and rare rain. But now, they have departed or fallen into eternal slumber. Only one god remains, sleeping beneath the dunes. Tonight, we quietly enter Simonarek to hear the tale of this lone being, the last god of the desert land of Simonarek. There was a traveler named Kerim. No one knew where he came from, only that he walked ceaselessly without asking directions, as if the sand itself guided his way. He carried a silver wood staff with a small, tarnished bronze bell hanging from its tip, a bell that rang only when the wind truly spoke. His cloak, once white, was now dyed with the colors of earth, wind, and sun. Each step he took left an impression on the sand like a whisper, not asking permission to pass, but as if conversing with a place that once had a soul. That day, Kerim crossed a silent stretch of sand, flat as a windless lake. The sky burned orange-red, the sun neither harsh nor warm. Ahead, something stood out against the horizon, a wall of sand, towering and immense, like a frozen wave, poised to consume the sky. But it did not move. As Kerim approached, he saw that each grain of sand hung in midair, suspended in motionless time. The space around was silent. No breeze, no breath. Only one thing remained, the sense that someone had once exhaled their final breath, and the wind had kept it from fading. He reached out, touching the edge of the storm. His skin met a chill, not of temperature, but of memory, as if this place had once been sacred, had once held something vast, and time had chosen to forget it. Kerim did not yet know that his steps were stirring the sleep of something ancient. A thin breeze brushed against his heel, too light to move sand, but deep enough to awaken dust that had slumbered for millennia. Beneath the quiet dunes, something waited. Kerim reached the edge of the frozen sandstorm. When his hand gently touched the suspended grains, a ripple spread outward, like water stirred by the breath of an ancient world. Then, beneath his feet, the earth cracked softly. A fissure opened, revealing a dim space below, scented with ancient soil and the petrified resin of lost time. Without fear, Kerim descended. The faint daylight from above spilled through the fracture, lighting walls inscribed with runes, twisted glyphs like the footprints of wind upon sand. He ventured deeper until he stood before a colossal statue. No, not merely a statue, but the body of a god in slumber. The form was cloaked in the dust of ages, one hand placed upon its chest, the other holding a now empty flask of jade stone. The face was serene, as if listening to a lullaby sung by the desert itself. At the base of the stone pedestal, an inscription read, "He is Giranor, the final breath of wind. When mankind forgets how to listen to the desert, he shall sleep. When their hearts once again tremble at the beauty of sand, he shall awaken. Kerim stood still. He felt something stir in his heart, long hardened by years of wandering, begin to tremble. Could he be the unspoken call that this god had been waiting for? Kerim could not resist. He reached out and gently touched the god's cheek. The stone was cold, but in that instant, the runes on the walls flared like ancient fire reignited. The sand beneath him seemed to dissolve. Kerim was no longer in the shadowed temple. In a blink, he stood in the heart of a resplendent city of sandstone and wind. Spiraling towers rose into the sky, each crowned with spinning vanes that danced with the breath of heaven. People in flowing robes of sky blue moved through the plazas, where wind sorcerers spun through the air amid the chime of ringing bells. Kerim, or someone he now wore as memory, looked down to see his skin aglow, dusted with stardust. He was no longer himself, but part of a memory, or perhaps a dream. Reborn. At the center of the grandest square, Giranor, young, his hair drifting like twilight mist, walked among mortals. No one bowed, but all parted in reverence, their gazes warm with quiet awe. Then, a great wind rose, sweeping all away, and Kerim fell, not to the ground, but back into himself, into the temple, before the statue, now faintly warm to the touch. Kerim sank to his knees before the warming statue. His heart beat fast, not with fear, but with the sense of standing on a threshold between two realms, one that still listens and one that has forgotten. From the statue, veins of light began to spread, slowly, like deep springs rising after a long, parched season. The glow was gentle, like moonlight through silk, painting the sandy walls with ancient shapes in motion. Desert birds, tamed storms, people gazing skyward, not to plead, but to listen. Then came breath, not in voice, but in wind. The first wind in millennia. It circled Kerim like unseen arms, lifting him to his feet, drawing his gaze to the eyes of Giranor, now open. Those eyes did not see Kerim as one sees another person. They saw through him, as though they beheld his whole journey, every unspoken doubt, every subtle fracture of spirit even he dared not face. Yet instead of judgment, the eyes held only quiet acceptance, like sand accepting a traveler's footprints, knowing they will vanish. Giranor spoke, not with his mouth, but through every grain of air. You have dreamed my dream, and awakened me with a heart that has not forgotten. The air trembled. Around them, sand lifted into spirals, forming sigils in the air. Giranor rose slowly, not a statue now, but a living being, vast and serene, like the desert itself, wild yet gentle, empty yet full. I am the last wind and the first breath. When men stopped listening, I slept. But now the wind has found a listener again. The world begins to turn. Kerim wanted to speak, but no words came. Only silence remained, a silence deeper than language. In that moment, he was no longer a traveler, but a witness to the turning of time. Giranor extended a hand, not to touch, but to let the wind show the way. You are not the chosen one, but you chose to listen, and that is enough to open the final door. Light spread. The temple trembled, and Kirim knew he was about to step into another world, not to escape, but to return with something forgotten, to those who still know how to dream. The wind wrapped around Kirim, lifting him like a dried leaf into memory, not just the memory of Giranor, but of an entire race, a civilization, an age whose legacy is now only dust. Before him appeared a city suspended in the sky, radiant and translucent, woven of light and air. Spiraling crystal towers rested on currents of violet wind, where the people of Simonaric, tall, starlit-eyed beings, lived in seamless harmony with nature. They built not with hands, but with thought, shaped by the violet substance that shimmered in everything. They called it Aeltharian, the matter of dreams, a fusion of soul, body, and the world. Each being was linked to it, thus they needed no weapons, no walls. They were light and guides of light. Kirim saw Giranor, then the youngest among the council of wind-born gods, guardian of the first cell, the primal essence of the Simonaric race, a radiant crystal of condensed wind, stored in his divine heart. Then, the vision slowed. A bell tolled, not an alarm. No one expected collapse. But the Aeltharian began to turn yellow. No one knew why. No war, no disaster. Just depletion. The violet hue thinned, shattering like tired glass. Towers lost their lift and fell, like flaming petals from the sky. Silence followed. No one could react. All things turned to stone, to dust, and wind, the force that once held the kingdom aloft, vanished without a farewell. Giranor, the only god left with power, sealed the first cell within himself and entered an ageless sleep, vowing, only when a mortal listens again to the wind will Simonaric rise. Kirim opened his eyes. Before him stood the pedestal holding the golden key, wrapped in the last surviving spiral of air. He reached out. A breath echoed from nowhere. You have seen. You now understand. Just as Kirim withdrew the golden key from the spiral of wind, a soft click sounded behind him. Not wind, but the taut release of a bowstring locking into place. Hey, handsome, a woman's voice purred, velvet smooth with a desert-sharpened edge. Put that down, or at least consider splitting it. Kirim turned. Atop the stone ledge above, barely lit in the temple's half-shadow, perched a lithe figure cloaked in black silk flecked with silver thread. Amber eyes gleamed under a hood, and in her hands was a short bow carved from violet horn. She leapt down like a falling feather, walking toward him with the precision of a desert lynx, not threatening, but undeniably poised. She raised an eyebrow. "You have no idea how valuable that little thing is." "I do," Kirim replied, "but I'm not here to sell it." "Oh?" She tilted her head, smiling slyly. "So you're one of those heroic dreamers. I'm Lethira, educated thief with excellent taste. Golden key? Gorgeous, ancient, wind-charged, perfect for selling to some fool king. But the way you hold it, I'm intrigued." Kirim met her gaze. There was no betrayal in her eyes, only a challenge. "I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I know I have to do it." Lethira paused, then laughed, a low, silvery sound, like chimes dancing in the desert breeze. "Then I'm coming with you. Not to help, just to watch you try. And if you fail, I'll still get the key. Deal?" Kirim nodded slightly. Lethira stepped forward and brushed her fingers through the swirling air around the key. It welcomed her touch. And so they left the temple just as dawn began to spill light over the edge of the sand. The wind whispered faintly, "Two who don't belong will rebuild a kingdom beyond time." They left the ancient temple as dawn spilled amber light across the sands. Lethira led the way, her steps feather-light, though her eyes often darted to Kirim, the man holding the golden key as if he'd stumbled upon destiny by accident. "So?" she asked, adjusting her wind-blown scarf. "Where are we going?" Kirim was quiet for a moment. "Where the wind leads." "Fantastic," she muttered. "And if the wind changes, then we follow." At times, breezes rose without reason, forming silken trails in the air, drawing faint paths across the sky. Kirim didn't know why, but he could sense them, as if Giranor still breathed and guided him. They passed through eroded canyons, where ruins of old cities jutted from sand like the fossil bones of long-dead titans. Once they met a contrary wind wall, impassable, until Kirim raised the golden key and the wind parted. Lethira stared, not mocking this time, and said softly, "Maybe you're not as ordinary as you look." That night, they camped between two dunes. Kirim lit a fire using fledgling wind magic. Lethira lay on her side, eyes tracing constellations. "If you really rebuild that kingdom," she said quietly, "will there be a place for someone like me? A thief, a liar, someone never chosen?" Kirim looked at her. In the firelight, her eyes were no longer sharp with cunning, but soft, uncertain, like sand slipping from one's grasp. "Because I wasn't chosen," he said. "I'll choose, even those who never were." Lethira smiled, not slyly, not teasingly, just a small, real smile, one soft enough to turn the wind. And so they journeyed on, toward where the wind led. Beneath their feet, the desert whispered, as if Simanarek had heard the sound of its own return. On the seventh day, they reached a hollow in the desert, a wind-sunken basin. Here, sand did not rise. but settled into layers of quiet dust. From the ground, pale violet mist drifted upward, curling like the breath of an ancient being long forgotten. Kirim halted, eyes tracking a spiral of wind weaving into a dome overhead. At the center lay a circular stone gate, etched with the oldest sigils of Simanarik, surrounded by floating stone shards, remnants of a grand structure torn apart by its own memory. "That's the heart," Kirim whispered. "The heart of the new kingdom." But as they approached, a sharp hiss tore the air. Emerging from the mist, a being neither dead nor alive. The ash-wind shade, a former god spirit corrupted when Aeltharion turned yellow. It did not speak in words, but in memories. Visions of ruin, screaming without sound, towers crumbling into nothing. Kirim staggered, his mind assaulted by sorrow. But Lethira stepped forward. Not with magic, but instinct. She dropped a strange grain of black sand, unfurled her silver scarf, and whispered, "I am one with no memory of this place, but I choose to stay." The wind paused. The shade faltered, distracted by the presence of one outside its bloodline. Lethira reached Kirim, steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. "It isn't only blood of the old ones that can rebuild," she said. "It's the hearts willing to create memory anew." The golden key in Kirim's hand glowed, releasing a wave of pure violet air. The ash shade retreated, then dissolved into sparkling sand. The stone gate creaked open. They stepped inside, hand in hand, and for the first time, Eltharion shimmered, gently but truly alive again. The stone gate opened to a space that felt barely real, a sanctum of wind where all sound became music, and every step left a trace of soft light. At its center rose a pedestal of violet crystal, encircled by whispering air spirals as slow as a sleeping breath. On the pedestal, two paths shimmered, one golden and radiant, straight and perfect, leading toward a vision of the old Simanarik, majestic, preserved, unchanged. The other was shadowed and rough, opening into an empty land where violet light had only begun to flicker. Kirim held the golden key. Giranor appeared, no longer statue, but a projection of wind and light, voice deep like stone bells. "You have arrived. The kingdom may be restored if you choose the old path." Kirim looked at the golden way, beautiful, yet cold, like a museum sealed in glass. Then he turned to the dim road, uncertain, flawed, but capable of life. He looked to Lethira. She said nothing, only gave a small nod, not to persuade, but to say, "I'll be here, whatever you choose." Kirim turned and placed the key in the stone at the shadowed path. The violet light burst, not as before, but like a new dream just begun. Giranor smiled, a smile as soft as wind, and faded. "You were not the chosen one, but you chose. And that is a power only humans carry." The sanctum trembled. Winds lifted to the sky, The sands beyond began to change color, not violet, but a hue that had never existed before, the color of beginning. There was no coronation, no golden horns, no fluttering banners. The new kingdom began with bare hands and questions no one had answers to. Kirim and Lethira did not crown themselves king or queen. They stood among those who had heard the wind, wanderers, drifters, scholars, thieves, orphans, different in all ways but one. They wanted to begin again. The wind-hollowed basin had once been the heart of ancient Seminaric, but this new realm would not be a replica. No towering crystal spires, just spiral stone wind poles built from reclaimed rock. No divine council, just a circle of agreement where all could speak. Lethira planted the first tree, a rare sand-rooted species with silvery scale leaves drawing moisture from the air. As she pressed her fingers into the soil, Kirim noticed her hand trembled, not from fear, but because this was the first thing she had ever planted, not stolen. Kirim raised the first pillar, a twisted stone tower carved with new runes, not following any old script. The wind shivered around him, as if Giranor watched and smiled. That night, there were no houses, just a ring of fire, a few soft laughs, and a humble pot of soup. But the wind carried scent, something the desert had long forgotten. Someone asked, "What do we call this place?" Kirim didn't answer immediately. He looked to Lethira, then to the sleepers resting with heads in sand. Finally, he said, "We call it the second breath of wind." They came, without invitation. No drums, no letters sent, only wind, once silent for 1,000 years, now speaking names. Days after the first wind pillar was raised, the desert echoed with approaching footsteps. Groups emerged at the horizon, no two alike. A girl carrying a glowing-eyed child. A blind old man who always knew the direction of wind. A former soldier from a western court, now bearing only a cracked horn. And many more. Kirim and Lethira weren't surprised. They simply felt it was right. Since Giranor's awakening, part of his breath had spread, stirring souls searching for meaning. Tents rose, fires lit. A brickmaker shaped stone from sand and air. A bard began to write new verses, though the place had no official name yet. But not everyone believed. One evening, while Kirim inspected wind structures, a circle of strangers confronted him. Their leader was a broad man in a dark cloak with gold trim. He called himself Surath, a descendant of those who once served the old gods. "You have no divine mark," he said, "no bloodline. You think you can lead what even gods abandoned?" Kirim said nothing, but Lethira stepped forward, standing by him, eyes sharp as moonlight. "And did the gods," she asked, "ever ask the ones who lived in the sand?" Silence. Surath did not leave. He stayed, bringing with him a wind-forging hammer passed down his line, not because he trusted, but because he wanted to see. The kingdom chose no one, It simply called, and those who listened came, and the wind was rising. The storm came on the 13th day, without warning, without sound. Just a small change. The wind stopped singing. A young girl playing near the first wind pillar looked up and said, "The wind stopped telling stories." Then, on the horizon, a dark wall of sand rose like a massive serpent, coiling toward the valley. It wasn't a normal storm. It was a memory not yet forgiven, a fury of forgotten dust. Karim gathered the people. "We can't fight the storm," he said, "but we can remind the wind who we are." They built more wind poles, adjusted the arc of the wind domes, but not everyone followed. A man named Thav, a former epic chronicler, stood up and shouted, "We are not gods, and those who pretend to shape the wind without being divine are mad." Some abandoned the towers, fled to caves, but others stayed. The brickmaker, the little girl, the orphan boy Lathira took in a week ago. Even Surath, once skeptical, stood beside Karim. He growled, "If the sand wants to test us, let it see. We are stone." The storm struck, twisting, howling. Wind poles bent, bricks shattered, tents flew like birds. But Karim didn't run. He stood at the center, lifted his silver bell, the one that only rings when wind chooses. He rang it. A single note, fragile. Lathira closed her eyes. The wind paused, just for a heartbeat. Then the storm parted, like some unseen hand peeling back rage. Sand fell like quiet rain. Wind returned, steady, breathing. Karim collapsed, drained. But when he opened his eyes, the people didn't look at him as a god. They looked at him as a man who did not run, and for that, they stayed. 3 days after the storm, once all had calmed, Karim and Surath led a small group north of the valley to a dune once thought unremarkable. But the storm had uncovered a cracked stone fissure leading deep underground. They followed it, not by map, but by the echoes of wind bouncing through stone. The deeper they went, the cooler it grew. Ancient ruined slabs shimmered under torchlight. And then they entered an underground archive, not of gold, but of memory. Before them stood hundreds of scrolls made of gaseous glass, perfectly preserved. Alchemical machines powered by Eltharians still flickered. And at the chamber's center, a glowing memory crystal floated, holding not energy, but visions. Karim placed his hand upon it. The room bloomed with light, and in rippling air appeared holograms of Simonaric scholars, debating the weakening of Aeltharion, last experiments, and an unfinished plan to merge violet matter with human life force, creating a living energy not reliant on gods. "No one believed us," one scholar in the vision said. "But if someone finds this, let them know we erred not from ignorance, but from faith in perfection." Lathira whispered, "They weren't gods, just people, like us." Surath, for the first time, bowed his head before the crystal. Karim said, We don't inherit an empire. We inherit the courage to face its mistakes. From that day, no one called the settlement a copy of Simonaric. It became the next chapter, written by those willing to try again, knowing they might fail. After the storm and the discovery of the memory vault, the air in the valley began to shift, not drastically, but enough that everyone could feel. Something was awakening. At first, it was a strange hum in the wind. Then, faint streams of pale violet mist emerged from vents beneath the sand, no longer dangerous, but gentle, like the breath of a dreaming world. A small group, brickmaker Talon, young scholar Rael, and a boy named Mir, who once traveled with the blind woman, began spending their days in the wind house on the West Ridge, where they repurposed ancient tools. They didn't call themselves alchemists or sages. They were simply curious, willing to try despite not knowing what might happen. They started small, breathing onto fragments of Aeltharian, watching for shimmer or pulse, placing them near music or warmth. They discovered that the violet matter no longer responded to commands. It now reacted to emotion and intent. Ryle found that when he hummed softly and warmed a crystal with his palm, it glowed in rhythm with his breath. Mir, playing with a paper windbird, once caused it to swirl around a crystal, and the violet glow spread outward like a blooming petal. Word spread, but no one came to learn magic. They came to witness gentleness, a power not of lightning or fire, but of care. One early morning, Lethera found Kirim seated in a circle of sand, surrounding himself with fragments of ancient runes, not arranged in old formulas, but curved like flowing air. Before him floated a single violet blossom, rootless, untethered. Its petals were made of breath, but had shape and rhythm. "What did you do?" Lethera whispered, careful not to disturb the moment. Kirim didn't look away. "I exhaled and thought of things that never existed. Then it appeared." The flower trembled slightly, as if it understood. When Lethera stepped closer, it leaned toward her. That day, the villagers gathered. No one called it a miracle. No one bowed. But they stayed. Some wept without knowing why. Others placed hands on their chests, where their hearts matched the flower's silent beat. Later, Rael managed to recreate the phenomenon, not to copy, but to understand. And for the first time, they merged Aeltharian with human breath in a stable way, creating a soft light that did not burn, a gentle flame used to light homes without heat, soft enough for elders to weave under starlight. They began calling their work the breath-craft of violet, not magic, but a communion between person and substance. Flowers began blooming along the wind paths, not true flowers, but luminous, soft points shaped like wings, droplets, smiles, and people began calling the valley something new, not New Simonaric, not the reclaimed kingdom, but the place where wind blooms. Time passed like the wind, soft, unceasing, impossible to hold. From first breath, from the first stone laid, the little kingdom grew, not loudly, not grandly, but steadily, like the rhythm of night breeze. No one called it Simoneric anymore. No one wished to rebuild what had once fallen. They called it the place where wind blooms. Here, children learn to listen to sand. Elders embroider by violet light. Wind pillars no longer just power the valley. They carry memories and even dreams. Kerim, now silver-haired, no throne, no titles, remains simply the one who keeps the wind flowing. Beside him sits Lethera. Her smile still carries a flicker of mischief, but her eyes are calm, as if the wind, too, had chosen to settle beside one soul. Each sunset, they sit together beneath a blooming wind tree, a plant with no leaves, only petals of light that blossom each time someone tells a new story. They say Giranor still lingers, not in form, but in breath, in every gentle gust. And maybe, if you listen closely to the wind tonight, you'll hear that whisper too. You need not be chosen, only willing to listen. And if you gently close your eyes, perhaps a first windflower will bloom in your dream.